Seeds of Change conference has been exploring two big questions over this last week. Firstly, what kinds of institutional reform should we promote in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic? And by institutional reform, we don't just mean a shift in policy, but an enduring change in the purpose, the values or working practices of an institution to promote human flourishing. And the second question we've been considering is this: is there a distinct contribution that the Christian faith can bring to the table as we identify these opportunities for social reform? Now, after unpacking these two framing questions on Monday, we then looked at three major issues. On Tuesday, we were considering the looming debt crisis and how we can respond to the reality of spiraling debt, both at the government and household levels. And as a policy response, the idea of temporary universal basic income was discussed. Then on Wednesday, the panel looked into the purpose of business. We had a rich and engaging discussion around how businesses might play a more positive role in society. And we looked into the example, a case study of a B Corp law firm. And then yesterday, we discussed the idea of the social contract and explored how a new social covenant might connect individuals, the state and civil society, including the church, to build a better society and reverse the damaging trends towards polarization and fragmentation. And today, we want to draw these threads together and land the week's discussions by returning to the title, Seeds of Change. We will explore how to sow the seeds of a better story centered around good and right relationships and the common good. And we want to consider how we ourselves can be seeds of change. But before I introduce the panel who are going to unpack these themes for us, I want to show you a short meditation which the sculptor and poet Liviu Mocan made for us for this event today. It's just a 90-second video, and that's up on your screen now.
Seeds of change. We humans are seeds of what God wants to change in this world. Imagine acorns on the ground. If they do not die and grow, if a storm comes, the water and the wind will sweep away everything around them. But if they die, that inner tree, that is a huge tree, 20 meters tall, 10 tons weight, comes out into the other reality, into this world where the sun is raining. But what happens is that when it grows into this new reality of light, the roots of the tree goes into the darkness of the world, into the darkness of the ground, and stabilize that ground. So when the storm comes, that ground that is around the tree is saved.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much to Liviu, who's a very dear friend of ours. This short introduction provides a wonderful aperitif for the panel discussion. And so I'm now delighted to welcome the panelists. First of all, moderating it is John Coffey, who is Professor of History at the University of Leicester and a specialist in religion, politics, and ideas from the 17th to the 19th century. He's a member of the Cambridge Papers writing group and the author of a number of books, including Persecution and Toleration in Protestant England and Exodus and Liberation, Deliverance Politics from John Calvin to Martin Luther King. So thank you and welcome, John. Then we have the Reverend Dr. Craig Bartholomew, who is the Director of the Kirby Laing Institute for Christian Ethics here in Cambridge. Formerly, Craig was Professor of Philosophy and Professor of Religion and Theology at Redeemer University College in Ancaster, Canada. He has edited and written many books, most recently, Beyond the Modern Age, An Archaeology of Contemporary Culture, which he co-authored with the Dutch economist Bob Goudsvaart, and The Contours of the Kuyperian Tradition, a systematic introduction. Welcome, Craig. Thirdly, we have David John Lee, who is co-author of The R Factor with Jubilee Centre's founder, Michael Schluter, and the forthcoming Relational Instability. A writer and speaker educated at Hertford College, Oxford, and Regent College, Vancouver. He has developed a relational approach to global systems and currently works in equity trading. His children, his partner Laurelie, are all from India. Finally, Jenny Sinclair is the founder and director of Together for the Common Good, a UK-based charity calling people across the churches to strengthen the bonds of social trust. She advocates for common good thinking and the building of local relationships. Together for the Common Good resources churches with online and offline materials and works in partnership to hold public conversations. Well, it's wonderful to have all four of you here, and I'll hand over now to John to lead us into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's wonderful to be here. I've had a long association with Jubilee Centre through Cambridge Papers, and my wife actually worked for Jubilee Centre back in the 1990s for a year, so it's really great to be involved. I want to begin this session with a quotation. It's from William Wordsworth in his autobiographical poem, The Prelude. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive. Wordsworth was recording the exhilaration of his generation in the immediate wake of the French Revolution of 1789. I was a student 200 years later, in 1989, as a new wave of revolutions swept across Eastern Europe, bringing down communist regimes and ending the Soviet Empire. For a short time during the student protests in Tiananmen Square, it seemed that even China might follow suit. The political scientist Francis Fukuyama notoriously wrote of the end of history, arguing that liberal democratic capitalism, having outlasted its major rival, was the only show in town. The First Gulf War underscored American hegemony, and the rise of the internet promised a new era of democratic openness. A generation of third-way politicians, Bill Clinton, Gerald Schroeder, Tony Blair, projected a progressive confidence in the future. A new dawn has broken, has it not? Said Blair on the morning of his election. 30 years on, things look and feel very different. The events of 9/11 traumatized the United States, and the debacle of the Iraq War shattered the illusion that liberal democracy could be readily transplanted to the Islamic world. The growth of political Islam undermines secular faith in the future. History, at least for secularists, seemed to be going backwards as religious nationalisms superseded secular nationalisms in India, Israel, Turkey, and other nations. The United States now found itself in a multipolar world, faced with the challenges of Russia, India, and the Middle East, and a rising superpower in China. The financial crash of 2008 undermined faith in capitalism, causing a younger generation to question neoliberal orthodoxy. If the internet delivered on many of its promises, it was also linked to a host of pathologies: the dark web, a teenage mental health crisis, and online echo chambers that exacerbated polarization. Brexit and the election of Donald Trump revealed that Britain and America were deeply divided societies. Climate change raised the prospect of environmental catastrophe across the planet. And then there was COVID-19. Societies that had prided themselves on their resilience were brought to a standstill by a microscopic virus. Unsurprisingly, there has been a widespread loss of faith in the future. Attacks on liberalism have reached a crescendo from both the left and the right. The philosopher John Gray, a Cassandra-like figure, has hammered away at the myth of progress. Without providence, he argues, there is no good reason to agree with Martin Luther King and believe that the arc of history bends towards justice. Yet hope is a precious commodity, and without it, as Jürgen Habermas and other thinkers have recognized, one can hardly sustain movements of social reform. I'm currently editing the diaries of William Wilberforce, one of Wordsworth's contemporaries. He was perhaps one of the most famous figures of a generation of reformers who believed that they could change the world. That belief owed much to the Enlightenment project of human betterment, itself reinforced by the technological triumphs of the Industrial Revolution and the expansion of European empires. But it was also underpinned by an optimistic post-millennial eschatology that anticipated the worldwide triumph of the gospel, ushering in an age of peace, prosperity, and justice. There is much in the state of the world and church which I deplore, wrote Wilberforce at the end of his life. Yet I am not among the croakers being those who saw everything going wrong. In later decades, many Christians would lose that positive outlook, concluding that the world could only grow worse as the end times approached. And I think we find ourselves in the 21st century in a situation of widespread despondency. The topic of this session, therefore, is of pressing importance: seeds of change, creating a new story. We humans are storytelling animals, and we make sense of our lives by reference to our collective past and our envisioned future. So we're going to be thinking about where we find ourselves and where we might be going. And it's really terrific to have such distinguished speakers here to help us. So what I'm going to do is hand over to Craig Bartholomew. Craig, as we've already heard, is the director of the Kirby Lang Institute for Christian Ethics. He's also one of these people who transcends different academic fields, in particular biblical studies, theology, and philosophy, things that have often been kept apart in the modern world, but were very much held together in the ancient church, in the medieval era, and in the early modern era, and that help us to think holistically about a Christian vision. So Craig is going to speak to us about plausibility, patience, and preparation. And his subtitle is Scouting the Future. So over to you, Craig.
Thank you very much, John. And it's wonderful to be with you all. And it's a privilege to participate in this important week hosted by Jubilee Centre. The pandemic and its collateral damage have alerted us unequivocally to the fact that our common life together and how we do that common life really matters. Now, I may not look like it, but I am an African, a white, English-speaking, Earl Grey drinking African. I grew up in South Africa. And in my homeland of South Africa, and in many other parts of Africa, you only need to think, for example, of Rwanda, we have learned through terribly bitter experience that our common life and healthy societal structures really do matter. And so when you stand, for example, in Rwanda by a river, and you watch 500 macheted corpses wash by each hour, you cannot but realize that healthy governance, healthy politics, and healthy community really do matter. Now, I think in the West, though, it's much harder for us to see this. So in the West, we have enjoyed relative peace and affluence for some 75 years since the end of World War II. And in such a context, it is too easy to take our comfort and our security for granted and to assume that we can simply concentrate on our own individual lives. Now, if we are listening, I want to suggest The pandemic has driven a train through such a view. And not only does the pandemic challenge such a view of individualism amidst a consumer culture, but it similarly challenges, I want to suggest, to the core, the sort of privatized Christianity that is so endemic in the West. Now, many of you will know that one of the effects of modernity was to privatize religion, to make it a leisure activity, which has really got nothing to do with the great big public spheres of life, like science, economy, medicine, education, and so on and so forth. But tragically, far too much Christianity has followed suit, reducing the Christian life to church attendance, private devotions, and personal evangelism. Now, such Christianity has little or nothing to say to the culture. Now, don't get me wrong, please. Church attendance, personal devotions, and evangelism are vitally important, but they are part of a much bigger picture, and we denature them if we fail to situate them within that much bigger context. The main theme of Jesus' teaching, I hope you know, is the kingdom of God or of heaven. And this is about the recovery of God's reign over and his purposes for the whole of his creation. In the Gospel of Mark, there's this beautiful metaphor for becoming a Christian, namely to enter the kingdom. And the implication of this is that conversion, becoming a Christian, brings us into the realm of God's kingdom and God's purposes. What missiologists have called, so evocatively, the missio Dei, the mission of God. So that far from conversion just leading us into the institutional church, personal devotions, and personal evangelism, although it does that, conversion from the biblical perspective ushers us into being part of this extraordinary work that God is busy with to erase sin and evil and to bring the whole of his creation under his glorious shalomic reign. And this is why, friends, Jesus says of his followers that we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Salt must be rubbed deeply into the culture if it is to hold back decay, and light is designed to shine and to illumine the darkness. If we are to contribute to the well-being of our culture or our cultures, then we will need to recover, I suggest, the grand, comprehensive story that the Bible tells, so that we can see afresh how we are called to indwell that story today. And so my first of only 3 points, easy to remember, is retrieving the biblical story. The New Zealand sociologist John Carroll argues, and I think we need to listen to this, that the church has signally failed to tell and to embody its story. In his very evocative book, The Existential Jesus, Carroll argues, and I quote, "The waning of Christianity in the West is easy to explain. The Christian churches have comprehensively failed to retell their foundation story in a way that might speak to us." And note that Carroll is not a committed Christian, but this is his diagnosis. Now, if this is true, and I think it is absolutely true, we urgently need to redress this failure. Few things, I think, would help us as much if pastors, preachers, and priests across the UK and globally would recover their responsibility week in and week out to rehearse the grand biblical story in 1,000 different ways in word and ritual until it becomes, as it should be, our default mode of existence. And if we retrieve the biblical meta-narrative rather than a piecemeal approach to scripture, which leaves us indwelling the alternative stories of our day, then I suggest we would hear with crystal clarity once again God's call to his people, to all of us, in Jeremiah's memorable words, to seek the welfare of the city, to seek its welfare in all areas, in church life to be sure, but also in politics, business, debt, unemployment, education, economics, civil society and family life, in healthcare, and certainly amidst a pandemic. Centers like Jubilee and conferences like this would then be absolutely inundated by pastors and Christians asking, how do we seek the welfare of the city? And so my second point, scouting the future. One answer is simply to pay attention to what is going on. The pandemic has exposed the cracks in our cultures, and we do well to attend to them, to try and understand them as deeply as possible so that we can see if and how they can be healed. The pandemic is catastrophic. It is a time for far too many people globally of desperate darkness. But as I have argued elsewhere, it is also an invitation to reflect on how we live, on what kind of societies we inhabit, and then to reflect on what kind of societies we want to be if we are all to flourish. Once the vaccines arrive, I suspect the push will be to get back to normal as fast as possible. And so we need to seize this window of invitation, as the Jubilee Centre is doing, to think hard about what is wrong with our societies, where the cracks are, and what we might do about them. In other words, we need a missional approach to contemporary culture. I've always been struck by George Wegel's comment about John Paul II. I love the imagery here, that John Paul II scouted the future so that he could best guide the mission of the church. Now, of course, in one sense, we cannot scout the future, and many of us will know that prediction is a very dangerous game. However, one thing we know is that the future will emerge from the present, and we do well to bring all our resources to bear on current trends and where they will or might lead so that we can be prepared for them. And just as we need to retrieve the biblical story, because I don't think we have it very well, I also don't think we're very good at reading the signs of the times. Now, let me give you an example. Take postmodernism, for example. I've learned an enormous amount from it. It brought vital insights, but it also brought tremendously real dangers, as everything, including truth and justice, became relativized. History, as Gertrude Himmelfarb, the historian, points out, contains an abyss of monsters that we do not want to unleash. Himmelfarb notes that whereas previously we were wary of that abyss, under postmodernism, we began to play around the abyss, a very, very dangerous strategy. There is a line, I suggest, between the wild pluralism of postmodernism and the fake news that is now proving a very real danger to democracies such as, most remarkably, the United States. And especially when you are facing a pandemic, you suddenly realize that alternative facts are not just funny, but can be a matter of life and death. But you see, if you've drunk all the Kool-Aid of postmodernism, and if we are the authors of life and all is malleable, then why not work at transforming our gender, our sexuality? Why not just ignore the pandemic? If we say it will go away, then will it just not do so? All of this, I propose, relatively easily is extrapolated from the relativism embodied in postmodernism. And yet, where are our thinkers who scouted that future? It's so obvious. You know, you don't need to make great predictions to see it could have led in this direction, but I haven't heard that many people making these connections. What Jubilee is doing is very important, but will anyone listen? My hunch is that once the vaccines arrive, there will be a rush to return to life as normal. Most of us will manifest an astonishing capacity to move on and to forget. And thus, if we are concerned to scout the future, we need not only to extrapolate from the present, but we need to think about what is likely to happen if the invitation of the pandemic is not heeded. I have read the task force papers with interest and been deeply instructed by them. They attend to the cracks. But what will happen if our societies as a whole ignore them in the rush to get back to life as we knew it? As far as we can, we need to scout the future to prepare for possible outcomes. My final point, living the solution. By next year, it is likely that the pandemic will be defeated. Life as usual will start to resume, and our seeds of change may, I hope not, but they may be quietly ignored. What then? In Lewis Mumford's fascinating history of the city in the West, he tells of the time when Rome was close to collapse. It suffered from elephantitis. It was hugely overextended. Torture had become its entertainment. In all sorts of ways, it was close to collapse. Where in this massive book of his, Mumford asks, was the solution to be found? Astonishingly, he points out that the micro solution was already waiting in the wings. It was being quietly lived in the monasteries. And in the Middle Ages, it would become the macro solution. Here, I suggest, is an important answer, a word for us. The cracks the pandemic has exposed will not go away. We will try to ignore them, but they are there, and if not attended to, will only deteriorate. What are we to do? We are to wait, but not passively. In our lives and communally, we need to get on with developing and living the solution, so that when it is required, our seeds have been nurtured into full-grown plants and are ready to be dispensed for the healing of the nations. Yes, we need a reset, and it will be wonderful if Jubilee's seeds of change are widely embraced. Let us pray and work to that end. But if not, let us embrace them, let us water them, knowing that their time will come. If the voice of Christians is to be heard, then we need to live plausible lives, lives that create a plausibility structure against which our words cannot be dismissed. Our seeds of change need, firstly, to take root in our own lives. We need to be at the forefront of initiatives in business, healthcare, law, politics, family life, etc., that embody the solution. And we need deep, well-researched, well-honed, relevant ideas about how to heal our culture for the benefit of all. There is a great task upon us. And do remember that while ideals are vital, indispensable seeds of change, ideas alone will not suffice. We need a riot of song, lament, dance, poetry, literature, sculpture, economic, political, and legal analysis, which is so penetrating, so moving, and so attractive that it cannot be ignored. May the Spirit water the seeds sown this week. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Craig. Very rich set of reflections, recovering the biblical story, scouting the future, living the solution. So we look forward to coming back and discussing those later on. So I'm going to introduce now David Lee. David, I first came across David's work, I guess back in the 90s when the relationism as a public philosophy was first being developed through books like The R Factor, which I know David was working on with Michael Schluter. So really terrific to have you here, David. And you're going to be speaking to us, and you've got a very intriguing title for your talk: 5 Inconvenient Truths About Utopia. So I'll pass over to you.
All right, thank you very much, John. Okay, so a while ago, I went to the ad agency in London, Saatchi & Saatchi, and I said to them, what about doing an ad campaign for the end of the world? If God was about to kind of call quits on the whole experiment of created life, what would the big message be? So much to my surprise, they took me up on it, and they came up with a campaign where the strapline was, be nice. Be nice. And really, it's as simple and as complicated as that. If we could all be nice to one another at a global level, we wouldn't have problems. We wouldn't need a utopia, because utopia would already be here. And I think that brings us to the first of the inconvenient truths, which is, of course, that it's never worked before. There are no historical examples of large-scale, wealthy urban societies that did not rely on coercion, with the possible exception of the Indus civilization about 2000 years BC. Furthermore, to use a word that's become popular recently, we are facing an unprecedented level of crisis. We've got COVID, we've got climate change, we've got international debt, tech-driven arms race, and I mean, all of these things put enormous pressure on our ability to cooperate constructively. The question is how to do it. And here we seem to be stuck with rather binary options. It's socialism or capitalism. It's state control or free markets. It's leave or remain. It's internationalism, or it's America first. So how might we lay the foundations of something different and better that we can push into the secular space? Well, let's begin here. It's not about ethics. And I know in a way that is counterintuitive. And in a sense, it is a little bit about ethics, because selflessness and character and the power of example, all of these things are important. But your civil order can't depend on the majority being caring or responsible or converted or woke, because it ain't going to happen. You have to assume that people are going to game whatever system it is they're in. That's what they do. That's reality. And any kind of utopia has to be reality proof. It's also not about ideals. In the West, we're very fond of framing our civil order in widely held governing principles: liberty, equality, justice. Now, the problem is that while they're inspiring, they're also not socially realistic. Freedoms conflict. Your neighbor's freedom to party is going to limit your freedom to have a quiet life. And we're not equal. In fact, we're embarrassingly unequal in all sorts of ways. So while it's fine to chisel the words equality and freedom on your government buildings and capitalize them in your constitution, social ideals mean nothing unless they're realized in the context of actual human relationships. In the end, it's the relationships that matter. The relationships are the cutting edge. And that's presumably why the French came up with fraternity as one of their major principles, which would be fine, except that in a practical global utopia, it's also not about love. Craig, are you there? I've got a question for you. How many people would you say were in your circle of meaningful relationships?
Probably about 25.
About 25. I think that's about spot on. I mean, some people would say as much as 100, but that's quite a large number to know very well. Second question, how many people are you connected to through your carbon footprint?
Thousands.
maybe even more than that.
Hundreds
Because
of thousands. Yeah.
how we use, but how we use carbon is going to affect every other person on the planet, right? So we're in a situation where we're connected to people, but we can't love them. You can't love 8 billion people, but you can't get away from them either. So you're tied to them, and countries in countless sort of distant and totally impersonal relationships by the economic, political, and social networks in which you, like everybody else, is going to be a player. Okay, which brings us to number 5. It's the networks that we need to pay attention to. Networks are what you get when people have to organize. Companies are networks, supply chains are networks, electorates are networks, nations are networks, global society is a network. Networks can be complicated. But here's the thing, networks have properties of their own that shape the behavior of the people and the stakeholder groups they connect. In fact, let's put that on a slide. There is something about the way social media connects us that turns ordinary people into digital thugs, right? There's something about the way financial markets connect us that makes it more likely that we're going to miss our global warming targets. There's something about the way a rights-based legislation connects us that fosters identity politics and social fragmentation. Now, the problem is that most of us don't notice what the networks are doing, because the stories we like to tell are about the villains, the fat cat bosses, the dictators, the elites, the immigrants, the terrorists, capitalists, fake media, Dominic Cummings, Donald Trump. Overcoming villains, taking them down and replacing them with heroes is the story that Westerners love to hear, and we've been telling it incessantly since 1945. But the real issue is not about bad people. It's about the way our mass networks bring us together. It's about the embedded rules, laws, customs, structures, protocols, technologies, and proximities that determine how visible we are to each other as human beings. If you like, it's about the human connectivity of the network, because that is what produces valuable social commodities like trust and loyalty and engagement. That is what makes networks, if you like, relationally stable. Now, actually, we all know this stuff. Internally, we know it, because have a customer complaint dealt with quickly and personally, and you're likely to feel valued, right? But spend 2 hours hanging on a hard-to-find helpline only to be cut off, and you're likely to change your supplier. Okay, fine, but how do you actually measure this stuff? How do you know if your company is relationally stable? How do you know if the United States is relationally stable? How do you know if your marriage is relationally stable? Because marriage is a network, right? It's just a small one. Well, you have to examine the way that the network is operating and ask just 3 simple questions about knowledge, synergy, and fairness. Do we know each other? On what sorts of interaction is this relationship based? How direct, how durable, how diverse? How accurately can distant parties perceive one another? Where are the boundaries of privacy and transparency? Are some parties in the network better connected than others? And does shared experience produce shared history? Second question, are basic goals aligned? Synergy is about fundamental common ground on which competitive processes can play out. Things like markets, Premiership football, or the US election, as we've just seen, all depend on there being underlying binding accepted agreements. Third question, is this arrangement fair? A balance of fairness in rules and procedures is what motivates participation. And interestingly, at a systemic level, fairness does the same work as rights. If the actual protocol of the Minneapolis Police Department had been to restrain suspects with minimal force irrespective of race, George Floyd would not have died. And the city's Black community would have more reason to trust a majority white police force. Now, in small networks, family, Sunday cricket team, a local business, all of that is directly under our control because mostly we set our own rules and we kind of establish our own customs and tradition. But in a large network, a listed company, the NHS, the United Kingdom, your control is limited. Somebody else is setting the rules and usually setting them with quite different aims in mind, which means that whatever ideology you favor, your world is likely to be full of big, relationally unstable institutions. Let me give you some examples. Capital markets. Capital markets are designed to channel investment funds towards business, but they make business relationally unstable by imposing fiduciary duties on directors that incentivize short-term profitability over long-term sustainability. Result, between 2009 and 2015, Volkswagen installs software on diesel cars that deliberately underreports emissions. Treaty of Lisbon, 2007, was designed to further European cooperation, but it also made the EU relationally unstable by cementing a centralized EU administration in which national electorates were further removed from control over policy. Result, since 2004, the vote share for Eurosceptic parties has more than doubled. That's been exacerbated by other factors like the credit crisis, but then the credit crisis itself was a product of relational instability in the financial services industry. Thirdly, social media enables individuals to interact freely at a distance, and there's lots that's good about it. But the business model behind it makes electorates relationally unstable by linking advertising revenue to clicks instead of to content. And so, result, during the 2020 presidential election, supporters of Donald Trump have heard only commentary that supports Trump, while being open to influence from potentially hostile third parties. This kind of relational instability is a systemic risk. Ultimately, it's what is driving corporate misbehavior. It's what is driving racial and political unrest. It's what is driving global warming. So I would respectfully suggest that we need to move beyond our existing models of capitalism or socialism, and instead of focusing narrowly on individuals and their rights or communities and their cohesion, focus first on the human connectivity of the institutions that link us together. Is it possible to create a relationally stable EU? Well, if you go to relationism.net, the website, you can find a report entitled Confederal Europe, Strong Nation, Strong Union, where we've gone into some detail on that exact question. Is it possible to create a model for business and industry that is relationally stable? That is the subject matter of the book that was mentioned earlier on relational instability. Is it possible to solve conflicts between nations? Well, we have a peace process active right now in North and South Korea. You won't have heard of it on the news, and that's the idea. Nevertheless, it's going on. And again, there is more information on the website. So, in summary, what is a good society? A good society is one that optimizes the connections between its members. If you want to explore those ideas further, there's lots on the website, and I'd love to hear from you. So if you go there, please leave a message so I can make contact with you. All of this, what does it amount to? Well, it's not utopia, but maybe a story about human connectivity is a way for us as Christians to take our presence into the public sphere in a way that a wider public can understand. Because that is the gap, I think, that we have to be able to bridge. And the idea of people being connected, not simply of connectivity of systems, but of people who are members of networks, is a fundamental to making the world a better place. And I think that has got to be a step in the right direction. Anyway, that's my time up.
Thank you so much, David. You've given us a lot to think about there and put relationships and networks and how we gauge their quality really at the center of our thoughts there. So we'll return to that. I want to finally introduce our respondent today. It's terrific to have Jenny Sinclair here. Jenny is the founder and director of Together for the Common Good, which is a charity devoted to restoring the bonds of social trust in a world that's increasingly polarized and fragmented. So doing, I guess, some of the work that David was talking about there in terms of restoring relationships. So Jenny, we really look forward to your thoughts and reflections. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, and thanks very much for inviting me. Is my audio okay? Yeah. So I'm going to do my best to respond to two such rich contributions, and I think I've only got 5 minutes, so forgive me if I tend to rattle off a number of reflections. And I'm also going to try and build in some of the solutions that I see that we can perhaps discuss further. So I agree with David, of course, about the importance of relationships. And I think his 3 questions: do we know each other? Are our goals aligned? And is the arrangement fair? Very helpful. And I agree with Craig that the church needs to restore its relationship with the biblical story and to resist postmodernism. But most of all, that we need to first understand what's been going on. As he said, John Paul II scouted the future to guide the mission of the church, but he also read the signs of the times, and he did so through the lens of Catholic social thought. And that can help us now too, to discern a Christian analysis of what is going on. So that, what I've referred to there, Catholic social thought, is a body of thinking that exists to uphold the dignity of the human person and to resist the forces that dehumanize. And it began as a response to how human flourishing was threatened by the Industrial Revolution, and consists of a series of biblically rooted documents and draws on learned experience to help Christians engage with the world. And there's no duality in this thinking. It proposes an integrated discipleship that requires us to play our part, and it enables us to transcend party politics. So through this lens, I would say that we can see that we've had 40 years of extreme individualism, and they've taken their toll. This predates COVID. COVID is just accelerating these pre-existing trends. And this kind of individualism is what David's calling relational instability. And as we as Christians know, God has created us as social beings, not as atomized individuals. So actually we've been living under the wrong operating system. It's against our nature and it's against natural law. And so long before the pandemic, we could see that this system of individualism was playing out on the right in terms of neoliberal economics, and on the left in terms of, am I frozen? Can you still see me?
I can see you.
Okay. Just my video seems to have frozen. Okay, so we can see that this individualism has played out on the right in terms of neoliberal economics, and on the left in terms of the me culture, the rights dominating and so on. And so we've had the influence of both the market and the state, and it's eroded the institutions of civil society and our common life together. What we've done is we've given in to the temptations of shopping and so on, and we've lost an understanding of citizenship. We've also seen a de-alignment between the governing class and the governed, as successive governments have governed in the interests of global capital and centralized to the state at the expense of ordinary people. So this is why we've seen a great increase in inequality, loneliness in the young as well as the old, crisis of meaning, nihilism, the breakdown in social trust, and so on. So this pandemic is accelerating these trends, and the grief that people feel, the sense of loss, is real. So these are the inevitable symptoms of an extreme form of individualism. And so, of course, some people have done quite well out of this settlement of the last 40 years, and they will argue, when this whole thing is over, we just want to go back to normal. We want everything to be the same again. But the trouble is that most people haven't done well out of this. And this is why we've seen political upheaval over the past few years. And the old settlement is on its way out. It is dying. That's why we've seen such political chaos and upheaval over the last 5 years or so. And the new system is yet to be born. So we need a new operating system. And people instinctively feel things aren't right. They're yearning for change. They know this individualism has somehow made our life transactional. Its culture of contract degrades human beings and the natural world. So I would say that in the church, we do have a different vision. And what we have is this story of covenant. And God is actually breaking down as well as building up, and is pointing us in the direction of the local and into relationships, particularly around the church can build local relationships. So we are custodians of a vision that our society needs, but it's not just a vision, it's actually the ability to act, because the church is in every neighborhood, it's local, it's rooted, it has the ability to act. But Craig is right that the culture of individualism has infected the churches too. There's been mission drift. So there's this need to build up the capacity of the churches to act, and that means becoming outward facing, not inward facing. I agree with him that the church has failed to embody its own story. Church has become inwardly focused. It's adopted managerial practices of the market, language of marketing. It's been captured by a secular agenda. Other churches have allowed social action to drive their purpose. You know, the church is not a service provider. Service provision is subordinate to the sacred civic role of the church. But most of all, the church has fallen out of relationship with ordinary people. And generally speaking, the church is no longer the object of affection around ordinary people. This is partly due to the barriers of middle-class church and the church losing its narrative around socially conservative values like the family and belonging to place. It's become embarrassed by these things. So the vocation of the local church relates to everyone in the neighborhood, not only its own congregation, not only in, but outwardly facing. And it's not only a role about service to those in need, it's actually about relationship with all its neighbors. If it can't do that, it can't act in genuine solidarity. And as the fallout of this COVID crisis rolls on, it's going to get worse. We're going to see redundancies and evictions and so on. Where is the church going to be as a good neighbor acting in solidarity with its people nearby? So this drift has caused the church to lose touch with its civic role. But no amount of hopeful language would actually make a difference unless this kind of this problem with relationships and this power imbalance has changed, and unless our actions are underpinned by an ethical framework which is rooted in scripture. So I would say if we're to be true to the gospel and really have a preferential option for the poor, and if we really want to see everyone flourish, then we're talking about building a common good that doesn't exclude anyone and which resists the dominance of market and state in our lives. So what does this look like in practice? It looks like a covenantal relationship where the church is not going anywhere. It's somewhere. It belongs to place. It builds a relationship with people. Jeremiah 29:7, exactly, I agree with that. And in practical terms, it means building up relationships with neighboring institutions. It means strengthening local institutions. By that, I mean schools, churches, other places of worship, businesses, associations, clubs. This builds this bridging capital that's so important to strengthen civil society. It also means, in practical terms, having one-to-one conversations with our neighbours across class, across educational background in particular. And it means acting according to our vocational responsibility, according to our gifts and abilities, perhaps what the Kuiper tradition would refer to as the spheres. So we have an awful lot to do. I'll stop there. It's thrown up lots to discuss, but I'd just like to really, let's focus on this, the role of the local church fostering a sense of vocational responsibility, not only among its own congregation, but within the neighbourhood, with its neighbours.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Bringing the local church in and explaining how it can be part of the solution to the things we've been thinking about, that's tremendously helpful. Perhaps we can kind of start there, because one of the things that struck me, we've got a few minutes to discuss among the panel, and then we'll open it up for questions from the floor, as it were. But But I think one of the things that struck me was both Craig and David touched on this distinction between the macro and the micro, the large and the small organization or network. I think it was Craig who referred to macro and micro solutions, and suggested that maybe we need to sort of start with micro solutions, and that will be our sort of way into addressing some of the larger things. David was mentioning that small networks are more within our immediate control. We maybe don't have the levers to sort of control larger networks. And then Jenny helping us to think about the local church in a more micro level and how this might work out. So yeah, I wonder if you could just reflect a bit more on that. And you know, is the micro where we start, or should we be working at both levels, and how do those two relate to each other?
Who specifically are you asking, John?
Well, why don't you start, David? Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I put my cards on the table and say I'm a big systems guy, right? So I get interested in this at the level at which you can start to make a change in big organizations and big governments, because I think that is the miss. In a sense, the whole small is beautiful thing, we kind of know that. We've known that for quite a long time. We know that we can make relationships work if we put the effort into it, right? At a kind of a local level, you can build community and so on and so forth. That, that's all great and it's wonderful, and I think we know it. I think what we're having difficulty with is, how do you make an impact on the culture? How do you make an impact on the conduct of industry? How do you make an impact on something as complicated as what we have just seen in the US election? How do we kind of put those things right? And it's not obvious to me that you can move straight from a set of recognizably Christian propositions to a form of social organization that everybody inside and outside of the church, and most of them are outside, is going to be happy with. So that is why, I'm kind of moving through this intermediary stage of being able to ask 3 simple questions that everybody's going to understand, and say, okay, wherever you are, even if you're in a BP or some big organization, how can transformation be made real in that context? Because it's not just me and the bloke that I share an office with, it is the whole system, and how that whole system is going to work optimally. Sorry, I'm probably rambling a little bit.
No, that's very helpful. Craig, what were your thoughts on the relationship between the sort of micro and the macro solutions?
Yes, so of course, one has many thoughts, because there's so much stimulating content being brought into this discussion. But I think I would not want to think it's a dichotomy. So, I think we need to have the big picture and be attentive to the macro. But often, I think, especially for Christians in a very secular society like the UK, that's sort of overwhelming and very disempowering. And it feels like we must just withdraw, we can do nothing. And I think the answer is no. There's a gazillion things we can do at the micro level. So, a society, I think, is much more like an ecology. And it's not just government and the individual. There's multiple dimensions, whether you're thinking in terms of Catholic social theory and subsidiarity, or whether you're thinking in Caperian terms of multiple spheres. The point is that it's not just government and the individual. We're all already involved in all sorts of dimensions of society. The big question becomes, how are we involved in those dimensions in society? So the problem very often is we've got Christians in, say, finance, but they've never done the hard work of thinking through what their faith means for living in and inhabiting the financial sector. So what Christians end up doing is just inadvertently reinforcing the status quo. So, and if we want to change business, we need 1,000 small flowers springing up that embody healthy business practices. You know, that's what I call plausibility. So there's actually something we can point to and say, it doesn't have to be like that. Look, it can be like this.
I think that's really helpful to use finance as an example. So we could say, for example, through the lens of this model of individualism that's affected us so much, that it has led through neoliberal economics to a centralization of finance. So we no longer have a whole variety of small banks that were existing many years ago. We now have 6 big centralized banks. So capital is massively over-centralized. So one solution would be regional banking, for example. You start to devolve, you break up that centralization, and this is where subsidiarity comes in, as you said, Craig. And we think about all the different levels. So the individual, the family, the street, the neighborhood, the community, the city, the region, or the diocese, and then the national and the international. So at every level, there is responsibility to be taken. So in a very practical terms, what Christians could look at, for example, is how to set up, for example, community land trusts, local endowment funds, regional banking. That's the sort of practical direction that the analysis that I work with leads you to.
Let me add one comment to that. I think it's also a matter of people in key positions being able to leverage their influence. And a good example of that recently was a guy in the USA has set up something in the West called the long-term stock exchange. Now, you know, this functions in much the same way as the New York Stock Exchange, but part of the condition of being involved with it is that you buy shares in a company, you invest in a company, and then you leave the money there rather than trying to trade it or to sell out when it happens to reach a peak share price. And I think that's a really interesting idea. And it's one that sort of moves on the level of finance using a language that people understand and meeting a need which is beginning to emerge. So I think there are opportunities like that, you know, at the sort of middle and upper levels, as well as all of this really, really important stuff, you know, that's going on more at the ground level.
Yeah, and that reinforces a comment that Scott Pryor was making, I think, in the chat, that many evangelical Christians, at least in the US, seem preoccupied with either the big picture, identifying worldviews or whatever, or very local action. And there's a case for thinking about the middle as well, perhaps systems that might be a better focus. We've got quite a number of questions coming in, so I want to kind of address those and throw these out. So this is a related one. This is for you, David, and it picks up, I suppose, on what we've just been talking about. This is from Aston Fearon. Very thought-provoking talk. Do you have any comment on thinkers like Chesterton, who advocate smaller local enterprises over larger corporations and institutions?
I can't speak to G.K. Chesterton personally because it's quite a long time since I read him. But yes, I mean, I think there are relational reasons why small and medium-sized enterprise works better. And it's partly because a lot of that enterprise is not involved with the stock market. The moment you have investors involved and you're into that whole treadmill of returning profit on a regular basis to investors, then I think the whole culture of the company is very likely to change. So I think there's a level of organization in business which can be free from that. And there are different ways of organizing business, like, for example, a very well-known example is the John Lewis Partnership, where, you know, the workers aren't just workers working for the management, they are co-owners of the business. Now, in a way, you know, that might seem a rather sort of small distinction, but it's a really, really important one psychologically in terms of people's engagement, willingness to stay with the company, the kind of the smile that's on their face when the customers come up. You know, I mean, these are quite key issues for the survivability of the business. So yeah, you know, small, medium-sized has a lot of advantages.
The Q&A allows us to allows participants to give thumbs up to particular questions, so that sort of sorts them into order. So let me start with this one, because this has got 8 thumbs up, and it's interesting because I guess it comes from a more outside the UK, outside the US, thinking more about the global church, and it's about global Christianity. So the missionary movement since World War II, I suppose, seems to have reinforced relationally unstable relationships in many ways, especially in the developing world, through missionaries reinforcing their cultures, individualism, materialism, even their own political ideas, rather than striving for emotionally stable networks, God's intentions for relations of fairness, love, shalom, and so on. So how can this, and I guess this is partly a kind of a legacy of US and UK missionaries abroad, how can this be addressed in a post-COVID world? I guess this is particularly for David. Craig might have thoughts about this as well, with his sort of African perspectives.
Craig?
Yeah. So I'm happy to sort of make a few comments in this area. So I'm not a missiologist, but from what I know of missional thought in the 20th and 21st centuries, I do think this has been on those agendas. So I think you know, there may be much greater awareness than perhaps the question suggests. But where I would take the question is as follows. Another question that has come up is, has postmodernism disappeared, and what replaces it? And I think that's a very interesting question. And in the West, what we're in danger of is a hardening secularism. Now, of course, if you're in the majority world, you're amidst a renaissance of Christianity and Islam. So one of the things that I think, if the West is to find hopeful ways forward from a Christian perspective, we need global partnerships and help from the majority world. So the situation is radically different. And I think if you're in a country where Christianity is burgeoning, if that matures, it may turn out to be the salvation of the West from some of our worst excesses.
Thank you. Any other comments on that global question? Yeah, Jenny.
Yeah, I just want to echo that and to say I think that this missionary problem is echoed sometimes in the way that NGOs act, sometimes Christian NGOs. There's a sense of, you know, we're the benevolent ones and we've got so much to give, whereas actually the relationship really ought to be reciprocal. And I feel that the church, particularly in the West, needs to recognize that, you know, it's in a position of quite sharp decline, and there is some grief with that, and that actually puts the church in a vulnerable position, which actually could be its saving grace, because if you're in a vulnerable position, you need others, and the church needs to shift from the position of host to neighbor. So this sense of humility and reciprocity, and receiving as well as giving. So in its relationship, not only in the so-called developing world and the non-Western world, there is so much gift that we have to receive that is there waiting if only we would listen. And similarly, in the West, in our domestic situation, the church has fallen out of relationship with local people, and again needs to receive as well as give. So not always in the role of service provider, but as neighbor rather than host.
No, that's very helpful. Here's a we'll keep going with questions because we've got quite a number of really interesting ones coming in. So here this one takes us in a slightly different direction. How important, this is from Swaraj, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but it's how important is our connection or network with nature or the non-human parts of creation, especially the land? Every effort to reconnect seems to be focused solely on human networks, you know, what we've talked about so far, but nature seems to be a passive bystander that we do good or bad to, concern for the environment and so on. So yeah, how do we integrate the importance of the land into our thinking about relationships, about these macro and micro solutions?
Yeah, shall I say something?
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that the pandemic is actually offering us an opportunity here, because it's the importance of place has become important again. The centrality of place in our lives has become important. Before the pandemic, it was all about mobility and so on. But now we're stuck in one place. It shows us the importance of where our food comes from, for example, our relationship with the environment locally. And the agenda of climate reform and reform of our relationship with nature is high up on the agenda, but that needs to be rooted again in our own responsibility in what we can do locally. So for example, the management of rivers or of local green spaces, this is really important that this is taken into responsibility with local communities, so that it's not all centralized by a distant sort of government level. Can be enabled at that level, but actually a lot of the ownership and work can be done locally. For example, local trusts and so on that take on the responsibility for the management of local environments.
Craig, yeah.
Yeah, so just one thing, I don't work with the same relational framework that David does and Michael Schluter. But if you do, I think one has to be careful to define relationality sufficiently broadly. So relationality, which I'm happy to work with, must include relationship with God, relationship to one another, and then relationship to the world. So a type of relationism which doesn't very clearly have our embodied nature in view would be reductionist. Now, and I think this, let me just give you an example of the invitation of the pandemic. So across the UK, because of the corporate world, and then because of online business, we have seen our high streets absolutely decimated. So in March, which is a lovely working class town in which I live, the number of charity shops which I enjoy is a sign of that decimation. And of course, the corporate entities, they have no real local commitment. So when profit ceases, off they go. Now, the pandemic comes along. In March, big signs have gone up saying, prevent the spread of the pandemic, shop locally. So there is what I call the invitation of the pandemic to recover place and locality. But the question is, will we listen?
And I guess online shopping has become a bigger thing than ever, hasn't it? So there's this a tendency in the other direction as well, which militates against the local. There's a question here specifically.
So yes, we're enriching the oligarchs. By shopping online, we're enriching the oligarchs, and we're actually denuding the power of our local businesses.
Yeah, so that's a challenge, I think, for many of us to take that seriously. Yeah. There's a question specifically for David here, which has risen to the top in terms of the thumbs. So David, what is the difference between relationism and social capital? So that social capital is talked about by quite a lot of different writers. And what about power differences in relationships? I know that's something that you have thought about. You used to talk about parity quite a bit when you talked about relationism. So can you unpack relationism and its relationship, it's how it's connected to social ideas of social capital and so on?
Yeah, okay, so I'm slightly cautious with the term social capital because it's one of those portmanteaus that various people have filled in different ways. I think in general, social capital for me is about the resources in society that lie in the abilities of human beings and the way in which they work together. So that is, if you like, a sort of bank of stuff that is useful for, whatever we as a society want to do. Now, the question for me is how you preserve that and build that kind of social capital. because the way in which our sort of individualistically based economy works is in fact to kind of draw us apart and turn us into individual consumers, so that we have individual relationships with very large organizations rather than with communities. I mean, that's the kind of tendency. And the moment you get that breakdown within families, within communities, and within organizations, and people are less able to work together, you are damaging social capital. So everything that I've been saying today, in a sense, is with a view to making sure that social capital is okay, because we need it. I mean, the world it doesn't progress without social capital, and yet it is very easily neglected. So that's the first point. The second one was about, sorry, can you just remind me what the question was? Oh,
power
yes.
differences in relationships.
Power differences in relationships. Power differences are there in every relationship. Sometimes they're reinforced by different levels of authority. But power is a very fluid concept, and you can be powerful in some ways and weak in others, and the kind of balance just shifts according to circumstance and time. So power is always there. The element of fairness in a relationship addresses that, because I think in a relationship, for a relationship to work, and we know this from marriages and from other things that we're involved in, if both sides don't feel that the relationship and the conditions of the relationship and the conduct of the relationship is fair, then people are going to disengage and the relationship will be broken and lost. So there is a very strong connection between power and the way in which it needs to be handled through fairness, but it's quite a subtle thing.
Some terrific comments here in the chat, so do look at those. I mean, somebody pointed out that in relation to the land, there is of course the Christian charity Rocha, which is grassroots, small scale, but really doing some of that that micro solution work that Craig was talking about. Yeah, Jenny had a question, couple of questions. I mean, perhaps this is a kind of bigger one, but I think it's as we kind of bring our thoughts to the close in the next few minutes, it's worth considering. Preparing for possible outcomes, what kind of scenario planning would be useful for the Jubilee Centre to undertake, do you think? This is Sue Halliday's question. So what sorts of scenario planning should the Jubilee Centre be undertaking?
I think what we've spoken before about the micro and the macro, and we've referred to the different levels of responsibility. I think that's a good place to start. And one of the phrases we use is vocational responsibility. Where are we called? It's very closely linked with our spirituality. It's not to be divorced from that. So the sense of listening to what God is already doing and joining in, rather than steaming in with our own project and then tagging on a bit of theology afterwards. So it's very much got to be rooted in that sense of God as primary agent. But I think it also requires a really hard look at the structural and political reality. And just to say a word about capital, since David was talking about social capital, capital itself and capitalism is an important force, and we're not anti-capitalist, but it has a tendency to commodify, to extract, to exploit, and to atomize. And so and to do that to the natural world as well as human beings. So it needs to be restrained. It needs domestication. And we can do that not only through regulation, but by resisting that power from the bottom up. So there's a sense of, I think Craig referred earlier to the word ecology, and I really like the phrase civic ecology. It's like we've got to strengthen, it's like a reef. If you think of a reef that's been really damaged over the years, we need to nurture it back. And that means building up local institutions. Think of that row of shops that Craig is talking about. What can we do to make not just our high streets, but our neighborhoods stronger again? And that's not just relying on the council to do something, but working to get inward investment There are millions of creative ways that Christians can do this, but I feel like we are called specially to do that because we understand the importance of place, and our relationship to where we live needs to be covenantal. Like, we're not going anywhere, we're staying here, we're committed to this place and to the people in it. So that sense of building up our civic immune systems to withstand what's coming, because it is going to be tough. It is going to get worse. The financial fallout next year is going to be really bad, and it's probably going to go on. The debt is going to go on for probably 3 to 4 years, maybe longer. We may be living with the residual debt for 50 years. So there's this sense of needing to strengthen the civic ecology, and that can only be done from the bottom up, with help from government, with help from local government, but it requires human ingenuity, and that's, I think, what we can do. And the church needs to play its part, again, not as this kind of patrician host of the past, but as a good neighbor in relationship with others. So, for example, when the evictions start in your area, what's your church going to do? Are you just going to stand and watch it happen? Or will you partner with other neighboring institutions and say, can we do something about this to look after these families, to negotiate perhaps with the mortgage lenders? What can we do? It's about resisting that power. That capital will inevitably seek to recoup its losses. That's what it will do. It's the reality about that, you know. So what can we do to resist that power, and also to resist the tendency of the state to centralize, which of course has gone completely crazy this year for obvious reasons, but that's got to pull back, and we've got to reclaim some of that power into the local and not give it up, because otherwise we become more vulnerable and more easily manipulable. So in a sense, we've got to become difficult to manage. We've got to be unwilling consumers who are difficult to control, and our interdependence will be our strength. So it's almost as if relationships are an insurgency against individualism.
Yeah, that's a really challenging and inspiring message. Have others got thoughts on what should be on our agenda, and Jubilee Centre's agenda, particularly going forward?
Yeah, so, well, I think one thing we may need to do in the West is learn from churches and Christians who are suffering globally, because with the hard secularism and so on, it's possible that the Western church will become a suffering church. So that is one scenario. And then, I mean, I think, you know, the words that I used, which I think would help us so much if we pay attention. I mean, the problem is, I think, for far too many Christians are not paying attention. But there surely is an enormous amount to learn from what is going on in the US at the moment. And for better and for worse, I think you're seeing the shadow side of populism. Now, populism is also rampant across Europe and the UK. So it's not, I think, that we're not being shown what might happen, but I think a lot of the time we may not be paying attention. So I think, you know, we don't know what the future will hold. And I mean, there's all sorts of scary scenarios, but some of them are being played out in sight. And then I think we need to explore those and pay attention.
And that's an issue with the church, because in some ways, Christianity, not least Protestant Christianity, did take a very strong populist turn, especially in the US in the 19th century. And I guess one loss there was the lack of deep. It did cause damage to traditions of deep Christian thought about society, and you know, maybe we're seeing some of the legacy of that in the present. David, did you have anything to say to this question about agendas?
Yes, I mean, I think I would only add that I would like to see us, and by us I mean, you know, in the broadest sense, the Christian community, being able to influence public debate and infiltrate the language of public debate in rather the same way as the Green Movement has. because I think unless we are able to do that, unless we have a presence at that level, which isn't associated with, you know, like the Archbishop of Canterbury and very kind of traditional images of what religion means, then I think it's difficult to prevent that sort of slow erosion of the culture. And I know culture's always changed, and I'm not sort of saying, oh, it was great, you know, 50 years ago and now it's terrible. But if we want to have, you know, a place at the table in terms of where this country goes and where the world goes, we've got to be able to talk to people in language that they understand and with values that they will say, ah, yeah, you know, I agree with that, let's do it.
And that's a real challenge in terms of translation, I think, isn't it? Because a lot of Christian languages is quite foreign to many of our contemporaries. So I know that's one of the things that you've tried to do with relationism, you know, to translate Christian values into a sort of common language. So there's this challenge of remaining both distinctively Christian and also communicating and translating our values into the wider public debate. So I've got a message here from Jonathan saying time to wrap up. So I think we've reached about 5:30, and I think probably Jonathan, do you want to come in and yeah, I can see you there on the screen, so I'll hand over to you. Yeah.
Yes, oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry that we need to draw the conversation to a conclusion now because our time is up. But I really want to thank you, all four of you, for this really fascinating conversation, which could have gone on for quite a while longer. And there is a chance to anyone who wants to stay on for a kind of informal chat in a minute. I'll give you, tell you how to do that. But first, let me just say a huge thank you to our four panelists. And I know you're all at home and they won't hear this, but if we can applaud John Coffey and Craig Bartholomew, David Lee and Jenny Sinclair. Thank you all so much for enriching our conversation this afternoon with your participation. So thank you. Yeah, and we hope to see you again soon. So just in conclusion, what did you hear? I heard Craig's threefold call to retrieve the biblical story, scout the future and live the solution. From David, that emphasis on the human connectivity, which is a really, that human connectivity, which is so key to producing relationally stable networks. And Jenny, a challenge to shift our posture in the West from host to neighbor. And that lovely quote was, relationships are a kind of an insurgency against individualism. There's lots of food for thought there. And in terms of a call to action from the week, we're going to send all of you an email tomorrow morning with some suggestions for how we might take some of these things forward, some things you can participate in. And the event formally ends here, but if you'd like to stay on for a chat with some of the other attendees, we have an opportunity now just to switch over to a Zoom meeting where your videos will be on and we can see one another and just reflect a little bit together on what we've heard and our own responses. And the link for that should be coming up in the chat right now. There it is. And so if you'd like to head over to that now, just click on the link in the chat and you can leave this meeting and join that one. For those of you who won't stay behind, thank you so much for being with us this week. And we hope to see you again, another event like this one. So thank you and God bless.